Hello everyone and welcome to another seminar of ECPS Youth. Today we are welcoming Dr. Heidi Hart, who will speak about the transformation of trance to identity rock, music and far-right manipulation. In her presentation, she will explore the wide range of musical genres and styles used in populist and particularly far-right propaganda in a European context. Dr. Heidi Hart is an arts researcher based in Denmark and in North Carolina. She holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and a PhD in German Studies from Duke University. Her research focus ranges from ideology in words and music to sound and music and environmental arts. She has published monographs on Hans Ehler's activist art songs and on music and climate crisis narrative, as well as numerous articles on sound in environmental art, film and literature. Her book, Climate Thanatology, appeared in August 2022. Dr. Hart serves as an Arts and Humanities Research Fellow at 68 Art Institute in Copenhagen and as a non-resident Senior Research Fellow in the Environment and Climate sector of the European Centre for Populism Studies. In 2022 and 23, she will complete a research project, Instruments of Repair, with Crawford Foundation, funding through the Center for Intermediate and Multimodal Studies, Linnaeus University, Sweden. Just before I give the floor to Dr. Heidi Hart, I would just go over the structure of the seminar. So we will have Dr. Hart present for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then we will do a short Q&A session with a few questions. And yes, so the floor is yours. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I really appreciate this. And I will really enjoy hearing from all of you as some of these new musical phenomena happening in Europe, especially, I'm still learning about. And so if any of you have knowledge about that you would like to share during the Q&A period, I would really welcome that. So I'm going to share my screen and try to optimize the sound for this so that I can play some clips and you can hear some things as we go. Let's try this. So can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and go to slideshow. All right, so this presentation isn't so much about causality between movement from one kind of genre to another, but about complication. Because there are a lot of ideas about what far-right music sounds like, and the picture is actually quite a bit more complex than what many people think. So we're going to talk about different genres that have been appealing to far-right movements, especially in Europe, and some controversies and some unexpected kinds of music that show up in that world, and also some of the reasons for music's power as a force of manipulation in propaganda, especially, and how this works. So this photo is from a Forza Nova rally in Italy in 2018. And this is the kind of image that we're used to seeing with far-right rallies, especially angry faces, flags. They're probably chanting something, maybe singing something quite aggressive. You know, this is the stereotype that we have in mind often of how these movements show up in the body politic. So let's look and see how accurate this really is. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the ideological power of music and why it's so influential in a lot of different political movements. And it has been for centuries. This is nothing new that we're seeing. So first of all, a quote from Dr. Sam Du Bois, Music and Online Far-Right Extremism. Discussions about music are prominent in far-right online spaces. So you see a lot of fan culture here with how people respond to music and talk about it online. And so he talks about the alt-right success in appealing to a wide range of different movements and groups and people. and how this music can be used to weaponize culture, given music's ubiquity in people's everyday lives. And this is the important word here, ubiquity, which means it's everywhere. Music is in our earbuds and on radios and on televisions. And a lot of people are listening to podcasts now. It's not just music that we're hearing as we go through our day. So sound is all around us. It's very powerful. And there are other reasons, not just the fact that it's all around us in our world, but it's an embodied art form. So embodiment is really important here. If you are in an airport, for example, and there are television screens on, this is one thing I've noticed over the years, that it's very hard to tune that out. You can close your eyes, you can look out the window, look somewhere else, but you can still hear the television unless you have something else in your ears. And so noise canceling headphones have become really popular because of all of the sounds that we're taking in around us. So when we hear advertising jingles, for example, they are purposefully what's called earworms, which are melodies that get stuck in your ears and keep going so that we remember them and we associate them with a particular product. And that kind of power of memory and music is very useful also in propaganda, to have something you remember easily. Music also connects to the body's rhythms. And here's another important word for scholars who are studying this phenomenon, and it's called entrainment. And what it means is that if you are standing in a musical space, like a club, for example, and you hear a beat, a rhythm, your body rhythms will start to sync up to that beat. So your breathing rate, maybe your heart rate might slow down or speed up. And this has been studied. It's something that actually happens, especially in groups. So it's not just one body responding to the beat, but being around a group of people, everybody's responding and moving to the beat. And this can be very exciting and fun when you're with a group of friends in a club. It can also be dangerous. And one of the most telling examples of that is at Nazi political rallies, where music was used to get people in marching rhythm at the same time, and to have this very strong association with the group, with belonging, with violence, with nationalist identity. And so these march rhythms became very, very important. In addition to other kinds of music that we'll talk about in a moment. Some of the most interesting literary and film treatments of music during this period have looked at the ways the spell of musical entrainment can be broken. For example, Günter Grass's novel, The Tin Drum, Die Blechtrommel in German, is about this young man who never can get very tall. He's only a few feet tall, maybe a meter. And he's in this permanent child body, but he has this very aggressive and powerful way of playing the drum. And he uses this to actually go against the rise of Nazism in Germany. So I'm going to attempt to play this video, and I'm hoping this will work to see how he actually disrupts this rhythmic pattern. Can you hear this?
We
Can you
can't.
hear this?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay. So
I can
let me
see
see
it.
here. You can see it. If I escape here, and what I may have to do is stop share and then go back into sharing, just check if I'm optimizing here. This is a little bit tricky with the sound. I'm going to try this again. Screen sharing. Okay, let's try this and see if you can hear it. Dismiss. Okay.
Auf die Westerplatte gesetzt und mitten in unsere geliebte Altstadt hat man uns eine polnische Post beschert.
So are you able to hear this
Wir danken
now?
für diese Bescherung.
Yes.
Okay.
Wir Deutschen hatten schon eine Post, als sich der Pole noch nichts in
Okay, so you can hear this talking going on, the shouting we associate with this. Here is the rhythm and the breaking of the rhythm. Okay. So you can see how I can't actually see the group anymore now, but you can see how the music changes from 4/4 time, what we call in music 4/4 time or march rhythm, 1, 2, 3, 4, into eventually 3/4 time, which is the rhythm of a waltz. And so when you see this, you get a little bit off balance. As you can imagine, the people participating in this rally did as well. So that's one example of playing with rhythm, changing rhythm. Eventually in this scene, because of Oscar's drumming, it breaks into Charleston, so a syncopated jazz rhythm, which makes it even more chaotic, obviously, for the people there, especially in light of the Nazis' demonization of African-American music, especially as what they called degenerate music. And so that would have been especially problematic if you were a Nazi or even in the Nazi youth, in the Hitler youth participating in this rally. So why is this possible? How does this entrainment or this musical power of the body relate to ideology? So I'm going to just use a word here, the word sticky, that a scholar, Lawrence Kramer, who's a musicologist, used at a conference about music and ideology in Stockholm about 10 years ago. And he used this term to describe the way ideology can attach to art forms like music. So Kramer works a lot with the idea of musical meaning and asking what that is, how much meaning does music actually have, which is beyond our topic here today. But it is important in the sense that music can have associations attached to it. It may not actually mean something the way words and phrases mean in language, but depending on your cultural background and where you've heard certain kinds of music before, it can take on this quality of association. So you can hear 4/4 time and associate that with a march, for example, or hear 3/4 time and associate that with a waltz, with a happy kind of sensual dance. So we have this way in which ideas can attach, and it's not always the same kind of ideas attaching to music. They can be completely opposite. And one example of this is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, particularly the Ode to Joy, which has been appropriated by movements on the far right and the left throughout history, as those definitions have changed over time. It was actually used by the Nazis in their propaganda, and also used as an expression of peace and friendship after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So here's another example of this. Wrong one. So I may not actually have time to play this, but if you want to look at a film clip, they're very easy to find, of the Ode to Joy being played in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin after the fall of the wall. But it's also a piece of music that's been used by very different political groups. Another reason music is powerful ideologically is because it can slip past hate speech laws, depending on how those are formulated. And this is an interesting book by Kirsten Dyke called Reichsrock, The International Web of White Power and Neo-Nazi Hate Music, from 2017. And she describes how if you're just writing graffiti on a wall, or sending out tweets or saying things to people with language, that can be much clearer in terms of whether you are engaging in hate speech or not. Music is a little different. Lyrics can be a little bit more slippery, ambiguous perhaps. Maybe they may sound a little more naive or innocuous, and so they may not be as dangerous in that sense and easy to prosecute. So that's another reason this can be powerful. We have a couple of other terms here, and I'm going to quickly stop sharing and restart here just so I can see everybody, because somehow I'm only able to see my screen. Okay, so let's see if I can get a different view. Gallery is there. And we will try to do this again and be able to see everyone. Oh, well, I will just have to imagine you're there. So additional terminology here. This comes from a proposal for an ECPS research project over the next few years, looking at music and far-right influences. And one term that we're using is cognitive praxis. And this is from a proposal here. Cognitive praxis argues that music actively supports and organizes how people see the world. It has power to actively shape and reinforce political participation rather than simply reflecting political ideologies. And again, the reason for this is embodiment. Because it's in the body, it has power to actively shape and reinforce political participation. It's not just something abstract out there. The other term is affordance. And this term emerged in relation to an ecological perspective on sensory perception, but it's been adapted by musicologists. This concept suggests the way the music sounds, so its intrasonic properties, like for example, if it's a march or a waltz, if it's soft and gentle, if it's hard driving and aggressive, all of these qualities of the material of the music. This means that it lends itself more easily to certain interpretations than others because it connotes the physical properties of sounds in other contexts, again, association. Importantly, musical meaning is generated by extra or outside musical factors, such as biography, connotative associations with other media, e.g. the way music is used in films, its relationship to social groups, as well as the music's acoustic properties. So again, music is a web of association and embodiment that makes it complex, but also powerful in terms of relating to ideology. Okay. So what we usually associate with far-right music, or music appropriated by the far right in some cases, is what's sometimes called red pill rhetoric. Now, this red pill idea is that you've got this binary of alpha, aggressive, masculine energy on the one hand, and beta, softer ideas on the other. And of course, this is very blunt and aggressive itself in terms of a binary. But often the thinking is, okay, you have metal and identitarian rock. This is especially phenomenon in France, versus emo or indie music. And so these ideas of masculinity, the aggressive versus the soft. You have NSBM, the National Socialist Black Metal from the early 1990s. Black metal is actually a really complex musical phenomenon in itself. I watched a documentary with my son who lives in Norway a few months ago about the black metal movement there, and I was just fascinated. I learned a lot about how complex this phenomenon actually has been, and not all of it on the far right side of politics, although that has certainly been an aspect of it. Another example is the AC/DC soundtrack to January 6th videos in the US. The insurrection group promoted their own videos using this very aggressive AC/DC soundtrack that they created themselves, appropriating someone else's music, which is of course very common. So this is the red pill rhetoric. This is the aggressive, hyper-masculinist, heavy metal sort of association that we often have with music on the far right side of the spectrum. However, this is more complex than it appears. There have been some controversies around this binary, and there's also more complexity to it. One example is hip hop coming in to the realm of far right music, and in some cases, the justification for this is that oh, we're colorblind and this is, you know, just human music, but there's also an element of racism to that colorblind argument, and so that makes it a little messier there. Viking rock from Ultima Thule in Sweden, which has been around for a long time, to Varuna. It's a group in Norway that is explicitly not far right, although one of their early members apparently had those leanings and is no longer with the group. So that's a phenomenon that's also very interesting because of the appropriation of Nordic runes, Nordic mythology, all of these aspects of Viking culture that have become very popular, especially through Netflix series in the last few years. And so the music that attempts to reconstruct Viking sounds and instruments has been easy to appropriate on the far right, but at the same time is not always adhering to those ideologies, and sometimes very clearly not. And so that's another tricky area. Rammstein came out with this Deutschland project in 2019 that was heavily criticized for glorifying this nationalist vision of German history. Rammstein has also, claimed, oh, we're not fascist in any way, but they've had their own controversies around that over the years. And so you could see this, Deutschland as either being really critical of history and looking at it as a reflection, or you could see it as buying into certain tropes that are dangerous even today. Some other more complicated aspects of music that's used on the far right is Fashwave, which is an electronic music form that turns toward the past, that's sort of nostalgic, and the use of irony. Not all of this music is heavy-handed. Some of it does sound like it has some criticality to it that may be surprising, and that makes it a little bit less of that red pill aggressive stereotype that we might associate with far right sounds. Oops. So another complication is this softening of the appeal of music used in far right populism. Some examples of this, and this is a way of reaching younger people who might be skeptical of the aggressive red pill mentality. So in Germany, especially in cities like Leipzig and Dresden and the former East, there have been movements like neo-folk Liederabend evenings, so the song evening, which goes back several centuries in Germany. It's an idea that you have friends over to your house and you make music together. And this started with the classical forms of Lieder like Schubert and Schumann, but it's continued through the 20th century and beyond to include music with guitars, group choral singing, things like this. And so there have been neo-folk groups who have tried to appeal to younger people by saying, oh, let's get together and play guitars. And it's very friendly and sweet. But the messages in the music are often very much about anti-immigration rhetoric, very much about nationalist tropes. One thing I noticed in Berlin last year, I went to one of the demonstrations against COVID measures, and they had these flags with the virus symbol and a heart in the middle. If you can see this, this is my photo here. And also there was a group singing the American hymn, Amazing Grace, which was really shocking to me, that this protest that also attracted far-right populist, maybe not members of the group, but people who were hanging around and agreed with this ideology, that they were using this very beautiful traditional American hymn that actually had to do with saying no to slavery many years ago, that it was being used in this very different way was surprising to me. In Sweden, there's a kind of sentimentality around nostalgic nationalist music. For example, Mother Sweden. I'll see if we can hear this one. This is the Nordic resistance movement. Hope there aren't any ads here. We'll see if we can hear this. Margita Andersson.
Men sedan en tid förrädare skalla ge bort allt jag Sverige åt alla ej längre något var heligt och kärt då gapade trynen reaktionärt men snart med stolthet ditt bröst du kan fylla söner och döttrar ska.
Okay, so you get the idea. It's very gentle, folk song-like, but the message is very much about preserving this nationalist ideal, not letting anyone else come ruin that, according to that way of thinking. There's been a really surprising turn in the use of music on the far right in the US recently. I just found this out several months ago, that there's actually something known as the QAnon song, this sort of conspiracy, mysterious ideological nexus that people have been very attracted to in the Trump camp. And this song is not actually aggressive. It's very sentimental piano music. It's sort of trance-like, and it apparently appeared in a Trump video, which I apologize for inflicting this on you, but I'm going to just show you as an example of how this sound works. If you can hear this in the background, don't listen to him, just listen to the sound behind. Try to move this forward a little bit here.
In more than 5 decades, we are a nation that has the highest energy cost in its history, and we are no longer we are a nation that allowed Russia to devastate a country, Ukraine, killing hundreds of thousands of people, and it was our own. We are a nation that over the past 2 years is no longer respected or listened to all around the world. And we are a nation that is hostile to liberty and freedom and faith. We are a nation whose economy is floundering, whose stores are not stocked, whose deliveries are not coming, and whose educational system is ranked at the bottom of every.
Okay, so enough of that, but you get the idea that it's sort of hard to hear, but these violins that are very sweet and sentimental, and a little bit of piano, it's supposed to pull on your heartstrings about this really hard time for America and how we need to save it, apparently, if we are in this camp. So it's not always aggressive music that is the genre of choice for the far right populists. Let's go on to Turkey. And some of you will know more about this than I do, but there are all kinds of very interesting musical forms that have come up under Erdogan and the surrounding change in Turkish politics over the last decade or so. And I find it really interesting that Istanbul in particular is such a rich world for music from many different places, and less nationalist than most places in the world. But in the last while, that has become a difficult situation, obviously. So I read something recently about this phone propaganda phenomenon with the Dombra, and I'm just going to show you this because it was new to me, actually, is that if people were going to call the regional court switchboard, they would get this propaganda music that is actually very traditional in Turkey. And when we have a discussion, I would love to hear more about this. But I will just play the video quickly.
Erzurum Bölge Adliye Mahkemesi'ne hoş geldiniz. Dahili numarayı biliyorsanız tuşlayınız. Bilmiyorsanız santrale bağlanmak için lütfen 9'u tuşlayınız.
So again, music that has been appropriated, traditional Turkish music that has been appropriated in this very nationalistic way. There's also the, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, the mehter music, that the traditional military band music that has been experiencing a resurgence. And here's a description of an exhibition that I found very interesting that Ahmed Asghari wrote about in the Palladium Governance Futurism in 2022, this year, on a visit to Istanbul and observing this exhibition. On the physical layer, cannons, cannonballs, and debris litter your immediate surroundings. On the walls of the room itself, artwork of impressive depth and detail features the bombarded walls of Constantinople with Ottoman legions marching through the breaches. On the auditory layer, a surround sound system blasts cannon fire, Ottoman Turkish war cries, and mehter music to confound your senses. So this is an immersive exhibition. And it's very common to see this in museums now, especially with environmental art, but not so common to see it in a historical way like this. But again, we get back to that word ubiquity of music all around us. And here, when you have an immersive situation, it's very hard to avoid having that music enter your body. So we have a surround system with cannon fire and war cries and this traditional Ottoman band music. coming at you in this room. And so it would be very interesting to experience that and feel what that feels like. If you would end up feeling this sort of excitement about Turkish history and this more militaristic aspect of it, or if you might be a little bit unnerved by that, depending on your orientation in the world. So we're going to go to Italy now, where obviously we've had a far-right victory recently with Giorgia Meloni. And I just read today that she is in fact enacting policies to really dismantle groups and agencies that are supposed to help migrants. And that's definitely part of her agenda. But in terms of sound, it's been interesting to see in Italy, which is obviously a country with a lot of rich musical tradition, and where they have often used music from operas even to voice nationalist sentiment in the 19th century, and regional sentiments in smaller towns. Music is a very powerful agent in Italy. And you might have heard during the pandemic this use of the Bella Ciao, which is actually an anti-fascist song, being sung from balconies.
La gente che passerà, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e la gente che passerà dirà, oh che bel fiore, e questo è il fiore del partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e questo è il fiore del partigiano.
Okay, so that's one example of anti-fascist music that it actually has a 4/4 beat to it. It's sort of march-like, but it's also a little bit playful. It has a lilting movement to it, which makes it a little bit less aggressive than the sort of 4/4 marches that we might expect to hear in a Nazi or neo-Nazi rally. When Giorgia Meloni was running for office, she at one point in a rally made this big announcement about her own identity as a woman, as a Christian, and the repetitive quality of this really became a chant for her supporters, and also a chant that's led to a lot of satire. A lot of it's not available in the US where I am right now to show you, but you can look this up. This is just one example of this chant. If I can get this, I don't know why it's asking me to comment.
Sono cristiana, Giorgia, sono una donna, sono una madre, sono cristiana, io sono Giorgia, sono una donna, sono una madre, sono cristiana, Giorgia, sono una donna.
Hey, so I'm Georgia, I'm a Christian, I'm a mother, I'm a woman. All of these identitarian comments that come out in this chant have been very important. And obviously you get this beat behind it, and it's hard not to move your body to that. And so the satire, of course, has come as a result of this as well. And visual satire, I just have to add, because I found this a little bit funny, because Giorgia Meloni has expressed love for the Lord of the Rings cycle, and that's been taken up on far-right platforms as well. Somebody came up with this meme of the hobbits with her, and it's a little bit disturbing for any of you who might also really like that series of books and films. So just so that's an example of how things can change through time, that we can have music that's powerful on one side, chants that come up on the other side, satire that results from that. I would say also that in Italy, there are a lot of wonderful forms of music, especially from Syrian refugees and people who've come from other places who have written their own forms of rap or hip hop to express what it feels like to be a stranger in Italy. In Germany also, there's Blumio, who's a Japanese-German rap artist who's done a great song called Hey Mr. Nazi, if you have time to look that up, that really goes against this sort of nationalist thinking. So there are certainly people who are satirizing the far-right musical elements that are coming up, or also coming up with their own art forms and musical forms to talk back to all of this appropriation and manipulation that goes on in far-right circles. Finally, there are a lot of things you can read. This is very, very dense. It's a working bibliography about all of these topics. And if any of you are particularly interested in this, I'm of course happy to share with you. But at this point, I think because I have a lot to learn from you as well, I'm going to stop sharing and we can open the room to some questions and discussion.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I loved the videos, all of them. It was very interesting. So I just have a few comments and a sort of a comment and a question. So my first comment and question is, how did far-right music
Miray, I think you're frozen a little bit. Maybe it's my computer. If you could repeat that when you're able to.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Okay, I can see and hear you now.
So
Yeah, if you
bad.
could repeat that again.
Yes,
Thank
sorry
you.
about my connection. So I was just saying, how has far-right music changed this much? Because like when you look at, the Nazist music, and then when you look at, the music around like white supremacy and all these like very violent and like so much hatred and just, you look at the music of the far-right movements now, and they talk a lot about, freedom and hope and like the nation, that almost you feel like, wow, like there's nothing bad about what they're saying, sort of, you get confused. So what is this change? Like, how do we explain that change?
I think part of it has to do with wanting a bigger appeal, because they know not everybody listens to black metal, and there may be other art forms that can reach people, certainly. So it's a pragmatic decision, I think. Also, it is a tradition. It goes back to, if you look at the Nazi era in 1930s Germany, for example, and I just refer to that often because it was my research area in my PhD, but the use of soft, harmonic, beautiful music was really important to the Nazis. They loved not only the operas of Wagner, you hear about that a lot, but the music of Bach and Beethoven and the beautiful 19th century songs. And so they really tried to draw on that sentimentality toward the past and on music that people thought of as high culture also. This is something that Thomas Mann wrote about in his novel, Dr. Faustus, about a composer who makes a deal with the devil, like Faust, and is very caught up in this idea of music and the sublime and what that means. And it's been so important in German culture, especially, that it's not surprising to me to see the Liederabend make a comeback with popular song forms now, as a way to reach people and make them feel good about their country and feel all warm and fuzzy inside, instead of just angry, because that doesn't reach everyone.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to throw in another comment. The phone call that you showed from the Turkish phone call, if I'm correct, I think that was Erdogan's campaign song for his election.
That's what I thought it was. Yeah, I just wanted to check with those of you who know more about this, because I had read something about that, and that's why it was so manipulative. And
yes, I thought that was so funny. I didn't think they would go to, that extreme to put it on a phone call. We do have a question in the chat, and I can read it out for you. Do you think there is a connection which exists between the alt-right pipeline, which exists on YouTube and 4chan, and the far-right movements on the ground in different countries of Europe?
That is a really good question. And I am not an expert in online aspects of these movements, but I would suspect that there are intersections of that, just because of how global the world is now and how easily things can move. And the fact that English is no longer such a foreign language. It's commonly spoken around the world now, and I think that's not such a barrier as it used to be. So I would imagine there's some overlap. Things like QAnon, I don't know that would reach European movements. It's a little weird for very specialized conspiracy thinking that's very particular to the US. So I don't know that kind of platform would have as much appeal to groups on the ground in Europe, but certainly nationalist music has a way of moving around a lot.
Oh, thank you. And I have another question. So now that we spoke about how, the lyrics change a lot around how far-right music is because they want to appeal to a broader base, then where do we really draw the line between, like normal nationalist music, for example, like the national anthem and music like that, and the ones that are actually focused on, excluding people?
That's an excellent question. And there are groups in the US, I know, who even before this resurgence of far-right energy would not stand for the national anthem, just because, especially during the Iraq War, it brought up a lot of feelings of, oh, we don't want to be part of that. Also with race relations in the US, you've probably heard about athletes who take a knee during the anthem as a way to protest. So even national anthems can be really problematic. And of course, we know the German national anthem has had its own dark history, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Not okay anymore, never was, but especially, and so that reclaiming of that language by some groups has been one way of reasserting that hyper-nationalist feeling around that song. The composer Hans Eisler, who I wrote about in my PhD program, actually wrote the East German national anthem right after the war. And he took the same 4 notes that begin the West German anthem, what we think of as the West German anthem now, and inverted them, turned them a little bit. So it's almost like an upside down German national anthem. And there have been a lot of parodies done where you can sing the words to either one and switch them around. So national anthems are a really interesting area in themselves and can be problematic. So that's not an entirely separate musical form. I think it overlaps and bleeds into more nationalist music. It's really a fascinating area.
Thank you. We have a question from Georgie. Raised. Yeah, go on, please.
Thanks. My name is Georgi. It's Georgian name, so that's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, because internationally it's George, so it's okay. So my question is, how can we handle this aggressive musics? Like, it's mostly, what I mean, I will say that it's mostly spreading in YouTube or in social media, right? And what can these corporations handle? How can they handle this musics? That's one question. And the second one is, what kind of relationship or what kind of relationship is between this far-right movements and freedom of speech? We have this dispute between each other, right? And in democratic country, it's a problem, because sometimes these musics are also aggressive and against freedom of speech. So how can we solve this problem between each other? Yeah, that's my question.
Very, very good questions. So as far as things coming up on YouTube or being spread around social media, this is where the hate speech issue is really tricky, because even with outside in the world hate speech law, music can be slippery, as we talked about, in evading that. And I think on social media, it may be easier to censor, somebody's comment on a post, but not a piece of music that comes out, because they may, whoever's, censoring or whatever algorithm is involved in that isn't going to recognize it. And so it's much harder. I know there have been lawsuits by musicians who have sued different groups or political candidates for using their music without their permission. That's a very common problem also. But again, music is slippery when it comes to free speech. And it's an interesting legal area that I don't know a lot about, but I'm sure somebody works on that. So that's something I should probably look into. That's very interesting. The other question, and yeah, was there another aspect of that one that I'm missing?
Yeah, freedom
here?
of speech and far-right movements
Yeah.
and music.
Yeah. And again, that's a hard question because how far that's protected is contested even in regular speech, not just in music. But again, an area that that I think unless you can show harm to someone, I think it's difficult to call that hate speech. So that's again why it's a tricky, slippery area.
Thanks.
And I think there's a question in the chat over here.
Yes, yes, we do have a
historical
question. I can read it out if you want.
Thank you. Yes.
I realized the historical theme in the musics. Can you elaborate on what kind of history is brought to the surface through these musics or rhythms, or why to appropriate Beethoven, not other musicians, or classical music tunes, not others?
Good question there too. So I think there are, as I mentioned, high culture associations, or I want to put that in scare quotes here, with classical music. And so there can be a feeling that there's an appeal to a certain cultural capital there if you're using this music. I was kind of shocked that the Trump campaign actually used Nessun Dorma at one point, the Puccini aria. It seemed very odd to me, but I think they wanted that sort of classy, emotional, operatic, over the top kind of sensation to happen there. Beethoven has been again appropriated on either side of the political spectrum, but because Beethoven often has these really, there's a word in German, Steigerung, which means building up. So this building up of energy that happens in a Beethoven phrase, or over a long movement of a symphony, or in a chorus like the Ode to Joy, where it releases this climax and it's exciting, and people associate that with maybe not military movement in particular, but some kind of action. There's a definite sort of heroic quality to Beethoven's music. So that may be why he's been batted around for so long. And so I think there are associations too with, again, march rhythm, with on the popular end of the spectrum, with triumphal music, like another, and I pick on the Trump campaign because I just got so upset by some of these things, like using We Are the Champions, Queen's music of all things, completely out of context. And so this decontextualization and only looking at the really superficial aspect of a song, oh, it sounds like victory or triumph, so we'll use that without knowing, what the song is actually about or where it came about in cultural history. It's very common.
Thank you so much. I have another question. So it's been very common to sort of have these festivals of, the far right music and all these, propagandas and all of those things. But in another perspective, is it, or could it be a healthy way, for far right people, like people from the far right, to express their emotions through music and art instead of sort of seeking it in other forms? For example, violent forms, or sort of, being more openly hatred towards people in the face, and instead of choosing it to do through art and music, could that be a more maybe healthy way to do things?
That's a really excellent question. It reminds me of when I was teaching poetry classes in a prison years ago, and often would be kind of shocked by what the students would write. But I thought, maybe this is their way of expressing it on paper so that they don't go out and actually do this in the world. So yeah, I think that's a thought that's worth spending some time with, because maybe there's some element of that, that, oh, if we go to this festival and get this out of our system somehow with other people, then we're not going to go beat up some immigrants who live next door. You know, I mean, maybe that's something. At the same time, I think the danger of it outweighs that, at least in my view, because it's a collective experience, because you're bringing people together at a festival or whatever this might be, or on an online platform, who make connections with other people who share their views. And I think when you get that collective energy behind something, that can actually become more dangerous. That can lead to how people vote, which candidates run for office, which candidates win. And maybe inspire somebody else to go out and do something violent. Maybe this group of people at the festival wouldn't do that themselves, but it might inspire someone else. And so I think it's it's a difficult and good question, but I think the danger in any kind of propaganda that's directed against people or to exclude people risks actually acting on that.
Thank you. We have one question in the chat, and I think that'll be the last question for today. So the question is, do you see a rock concert organized by two opposing ideological groups as an icebreaker, hoping to build bridges between different groups?
That's a great dialectical idea. Bring together two contrasting elements and see. It could go the other way. You know, there could be an explosion of violence or something that happens. But it's also, I hadn't thought of that before, as maybe a way to get people to talk to each other, or maybe treat it in a sort of playful way, like a game or a contest or something like that. That might be useful. Or yes, I see this comment down here, maybe a classical concert then, or maybe an educational concert, you know, where we, you know, play Beethoven and we look at all the different political groups who have used that music, or popular music in the same way. I think it could be fun. Maybe somebody could do a YouTube series about this, because, you know, those are very popular too. It's a way of learning about history. Is let's look at musical appropriation, but in a more fun kind of way. And maybe there just needs to be more education about how music works on the body. I know my students over the years have been really amazed to find out how influenced they are by music and advertising, that they start to really notice how things get stuck in the ear, or they you know, start to have feelings about a product because of the music as much as anything. And so maybe to raise awareness about how music works on the body and to get people to be more critical in how they listen would be a first step.
Thank you so much. I think we don't have any other questions, so I will end the seminar here, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I think it was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for everyone who joined us today.